Okay, hello everybody and welcome to my home, the webinar here. So let me grab something. So first of all, these are very strange times. I know that a lot of the viewers here are in India. I'm here from New Zealand. I'm also in lockdown. This is day one. So I just want to start by hoping that you're all safe. What's going to happen here today is I have a volunteer essay which is beneath this piece of paper here. So just first of all, I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about myself. As you know, or you may know me from some of the videos, I've been an IELTS tutor for about the last 2 years. Prior to that, I taught English for a very long time in South Korea. Most of that time was at a university, so very familiar with academic English. So what I really want to focus on here is writing task 2. I know for a lot of you that's a big challenge. We have one subscriber who has willingly volunteered their essay, so I'd like to say thank you to the subscriber for volunteering their essay. What I'm going to do in this webinar is just go through the video, go through the essay step by step, talk about the good things, talk about some things to improve upon, so that you can see an example of an essay live and how it can be improved to give a better overall score. So, without further ado, now you're going to see quite a bit of this. So, as I mentioned, I am at home and we're just making do with what we have here. Luckily, we have a whiteboard and all of this A1 paper. Okay. Here is the task. Now, I'll give you a chance at home to read the task. Now, let's imagine for a second that you're in the test. Definitely need to read the task a couple of times to completely understand it. The next thing you need to do is you need to identify what task it is. Now, if you've watched the videos, if you haven't, you might remember that there are 5 different tasks. So here we have it here. To what extent do you agree with this view? And the view is, there's only one view, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, that some people believe that the government spends too much money on the arts and that it should spend more on other things. So there are actually 5 different tasks for writing task 2. There is agree or disagree. There are 2 views and your own. There are advantages and disadvantages, problem solution, and occasionally you get a question where there are actually 2 different questions. So you'll see 2 question marks. That might be a variation of some of the others, but I'll give you a chance. Which task do you think this one is? So take a few seconds to think about that. Okay, if you said that this is an agree-disagree, well done. Now, I mentioned that there is only one view. That's the big difference between agree, disagree, and 2 views and give your own opinion. Here there is only one view. And again, that view is that some people believe the government spends too much money on the arts and it should be spent on other things. Now, throughout this video, throughout this webinar, you might see me put this question back up, but for now I'm going to take it off and we're going to go through to the introduction which one of our subscribers has written. Okay, I'm back. So I'll give you a chance at home to read the subscriber's introduction right here. So take a minute or so to do that. Now, if you have watched the videos which I made, when you write an introduction, one way to think about it is 3 P's. The first one is paraphrase. The second one, so let me put that on into my pen. The second one is position. And then a preview, right? So, hence the 3 P's, P, P, P. So, I think it's quite likely that the subscriber has seen my videos and taken some of this on board. The reason I say that is I think the subscriber has nicely paraphrased the question. And I especially like the fact that the subscriber is starting to use a range of grammar. Now, what he, and I know it's a he, what he has done is he's used a nice passive voice construction. It is argued. So, to get a good score for grammatical accuracy, and if you don't have the band descriptors, they're not a bad thing to have with you to accompany these tutorials or these webinars. If you don't, remember this is going to be posted and you can watch it again later, but I'm going to be holding on to the band descriptors throughout these webinars just to refer to them. But it does say on the band descriptors to use a range of grammar, so a range of different grammatical structures. So this is a nice one to start with. Another way to think about this test is that you're showing off to the examiner. You're showing the examiner, look at me, I can use all these different grammatical structures. This one here is passive, so we have the subject. Then we have the auxiliary, which in this case is be. And I know a lot of you are probably very strong. Maybe you went through a schooling system where you memorized different verb forms. This one is known as the past participle. Now, if you spot any spelling mistakes while you're watching, send a comment through and I'll definitely correct myself. But argued, argued, argued. So it is argued. Again, really nice way to start off this answer. The next thing I like about this paraphrasing is the use of the conjunction, or relative pronoun in this case, that. Now, in most cases in your essay, when you use that, it's going to indicate that you're using a complex sentence. So never omit that if there is a choice. If you have a choice, keep that in your writing, because that's just going to highlight complex sentences. Now, some of you may be wondering, what is a complex sentence? Well, in terms of IELTS, they're really important. They are mentioned in the band descriptors. An easy way to think, or a rule of thumb to think about complex sentences, it's a sentence which has more than one clause, so 2 parts or more. One of those parts depends on the other parts to give it meaning. So, in this case, imagine I walked up to you on the street and I simply said, it is argued that. So, you're going to wonder what I'm talking about because obviously I haven't completed the sentence. So that means the remainder of the sentence or the next clause depends, or it's directly linked to the first part. Other ways to form complex sentences, I'll write some of them up for you. Think about conjunction because, which, if, and so on. So you want to be using as many complex sentences in your writing, in the IELTS writing task 2 as you can. If you have a choice, just go with a complex sentence. So it is argued that spending too much money on the arts is not really useful and it should be replaced by other things. So what the student has done here is they have paraphrased the statement given in the question well. So that's the first P, paraphrase. Okay, do you remember what the next P is? I'll give you a chance. If you said position, well done. And what this means, you need to tell the examiner very clearly whether you agree or disagree with the statement that we were given. Now, I'll read that statement back to you rather than put it back up. Some people believe that the government spends too much money on the arts and it should spend more on other things. So again, student has paraphrased that. Now, the student here says, I totally agree with this, and that I think it is necessary to using money on the arts. Now, unfortunately, this is probably the first mistake which the student has made. So if this is your essay and you're watching, please take this on board as positive feedback, because I'm really impressed with the start of your essay, but you need to make your position very, very clear, right? And also, in this case, if you think that the government should spend money on the arts, then you're actually disagreeing. Because again, the statement is, actually I'll put the statement back up. So yeah, obviously I don't have a digital whiteboard here, but here we see it again. Some people believe that the government spends too much money on the arts and that it should spend more money on other things. So in this case, the other things could be education, health, defense, infrastructure such as roads, bridges. If you agree, if you think that the government should spend money on the arts, you're actually disagreeing with this statement. So I hope that makes sense. Now, at this point, I just want to talk in general, and what I think is that it would actually be a good idea to agree with the statement in this case, because like I mentioned before, it gives you a wider range of topics to talk about. That by nature is going to give you a wider range of vocabulary. Now, we'll talk more about vocabulary in a second, but just the rule of thumb, the more vocabulary you can use, the wider range, as it says in the band descriptors, the wider the range of vocabulary, the better. So anyway, in this case, the student has gone with the position that they think the government should continue to spend a good deal of money on the arts. So the position is a little bit out. But I would say if the student is consistent with that position throughout the rest of the essay, perhaps the examiner will only see that as one fault, but we can only really speculate. The next thing, the third P, I'll give you a chance to remember. The third P, if you said preview, well done. So what this introduction here is missing as well, I think, is a preview of the main points. Now, you'll be able to see the main points as I go through the rest of the essay. But again, to balance out my feedback, I think really good paraphrasing, nice use of passive voice, already incorporating or using some complex sentences, but just think really carefully about your position. Now, if this was a test situation and I was given that question, I wouldn't even start writing my answer until I thought very clearly about my position. Planning is part of the writing process. Probably for most, it's going to take about 5 minutes to choose your position at the start of the test. Another rule of thumb, think about the easiest position to take and think about the position which will give you enough different vocabulary that you can use. So I think in this case, if you're just focusing on the arts, perhaps it might be a little more difficult. And again, definitely I would look at including a preview of your main points. But let's go on to the first main body paragraph. Now, I apologize if I erase anything that you might be taking notes about. Just remember this video will be uploaded, so if there's something that you miss in your note taking, if you're doing that, you can always watch the replay. So I'm just going to erase this. Okay, this is the first main body paragraph, which really should contain one main idea to support the position. And I'll give you a chance again. You'll probably get used to this. I'm going to put a lot of thinking back to you because I want this video to be as active for you as possible. What was the position that this student took? Did the student agree with the statement or disagree? So think about that. Now, if you said disagree, well done. So the student disagrees and they think the government should fund the arts more. Right, so remember, that's the position that the student's taken. What I want you to do, take some time, read this main body paragraph. Now, this is a really good way of deconstructing writing. I want you to read through this main body paragraph. What is the main point to support the position that the student is taking here? So, what's the main point to support the position that the student has taken in this main body paragraph? So take a couple of minutes and see if you can find that main point. You might want to read it twice, so I'll give you another 30 seconds. Okay, so remember, in this main body paragraph, we're looking for the main point that the student is giving to support his position, which is that the government should fund the arts more. Now, what we're really focusing on here in terms of the band descriptors is the task response. It says in band 9, fully addresses all parts of the task and presents a fully developed position. So, we can see here, first of all, I think arts represent a country. So, I think what the student's trying to say is that arts are a symbol of the country. One way arts do this is by maintaining culture. So there's a mention here of culture, which I think is, can relate to the symbol of a country. For example, people from every country can visit museums to find out about the history of a country. So to me, the two keywords that pop out are culture and history. In addition, this adds interest for local people because of cultural displays. Now, I think really the main point is embedded in the topic sentence here. So not bad, definitely building the argument. First of all, I think arts represent a country. What I would probably like to see to make this topic sentence a little stronger is a mention about culture and history in the topic sentence. So that way you're just kind of embracing or encompassing the other supporting ideas which are in this paragraph. Some other things which pop out to me here. And this is the second column in the band descriptors. It's coherence and cohesion. Now, in terms of coherence and cohesion, basically this just means, is the essay written well so that the reader can follow it easily? These are really key to do that. Now, another mention from my videos, cohesive devices. Now, here is one, first of all. So, first of all is an example. I'll put that up in red. Okay, first of all, that is a cohesive device. See if you can spot some others here in this main body paragraph. There are others, so I'm not going to give you a hopeless mission. See if you can find other cohesive devices. Okay, if you identified, for example, well done. And the other one that I can see at the moment is in addition. Now, with cohesive devices, just like complex sentences, the more that you use, the better, essentially. So I think the student is doing really well in terms of incorporating cohesive devices into this main body paragraph to improve the readability, to let the reader follow their argument. So that's definitely a positive. Let's move on to the next band descriptor, which is lexical resources. Now, very fancy word for vocabulary. Now, I want to talk about a little strategy for vocabulary. So I'll put up the band descriptor. Again, if you heard before, this just means vocabulary. Very important in the IELTS. If you were wondering, with the 4 different band descriptors, or the 4 different columns, each of them has the same weighting. So vocabulary essentially is 25% of your mark. Now, I like to think of this. Every essay is going to have 2 or 3 hot words, or, real focus words, which are the essence of the essay. In this case, it is arts, or I might even want to put here the arts. So during your planning time, I highly recommend trying to brainstorm a list of synonyms or other ways of saying the arts. So do that at home if you can. Try to think of other ways of saying the arts. I'll give you a minute or so to do that. Okay, if you can't think of any other ways of saying the arts, you're actually doing very well, because neither can I. But what I can do, in the absence of any close synonyms, what I can do is give examples. So here is a way of using more vocabulary. Now, actually I would like to see this in the introduction paragraph. So the arts such as, and here you can use a wider range of vocabulary. Again, show off to the examiner, look, I know exactly what the arts are, and here are some examples, such as ballet, which is something I clearly do not do, but anyway, ballet. What else is another example of the arts? Cultural performances, or actually I probably wouldn't go for cultural, because that's going to mean that I'm using the word culture, or the student is using the word culture too much. Statues. What else could we have as an example of the arts? Paintings. Now, throughout your essay, you might want to give some examples of the arts instead of using a synonym, which I think is really hard in this case. Another hot word here, I think, is, and by hot word again, I mean words which you're going to use frequently throughout the essay. Money. Now, in terms of this money, it relates to the government. So one word that I can think of is budget. So I'll give you a chance at home. See if you can think of other words or synonyms or phrases for money. And remember, the context of this money is government spending. So money. Take a few moments, see if you can think of some synonyms. Maybe I'll have the same synonym on the board in a second. Okay, if you came up with funds, well done. You might just say spending. Again, you might want to put government before that. Whoops, there's a misspell. Another way of saying spending is expenditure. Now, we can see the government down here. To me, the government is probably the third word which comes to mind as a frequently used word throughout the entire essay. This is, again, when you're preparing for the IELTS, think about words which might appear on any given essay. Government is a really good one to think about because there are many essay topics which talk about the government. I want to give you a hint. This is a synonym for the government. Usually it has the definite article the before it, but it begins with S. See if you can guess what this word is. Synonym for the government. Give you another 10 seconds. If you guessed the state, well done. So, these are the three keywords that what I would do again during my planning time. I would think of synonyms on the side of my paper, on the question paper, before I start writing my essay. And then what you can do is you can just cycle through all of these different words. So in that way, we might avoid using these words repetitively. Again, with vocabulary, to get a higher score, you just want to use a range of different vocabulary, but that also includes using a range of vocabulary for keywords which relate to a given essay. Now, what I tend to do when I'm giving feedback on vocabulary for individual essays is I look at a main body paragraph, or I try, usually one at a time, and then I think about the use of keywords in that main body paragraph. Maybe those words are used throughout the essay, but because these words are more likely to be used throughout the essay, when I'm just considering this main body paragraph, what I notice is the word culture once. Where else? There's a form of culture. So I can see the word, or variation of the word culture, different form here. So we have the noun, culture, and then we have the adjective form, cultural. Now, this is something I want to talk about next. This is another strategy which I think the student is using very well. If no synonym, this sounds like a logic problem, but it's just a strategy that you can use in your writing. If no synonym, use a different part of speech. Now, what you'll often see in an English class is part of speech. Teachers often refer to that as POS. Part of speech. Acronym for part of speech is POS. Part of speech means here is the noun, culture, here is the adjective, cultural. So just like to point out that I think the student is doing a good job of using different parts of speech. That not only, well, it goes some way to using a wider range of vocabulary, but it also demonstrates a good knowledge of grammar. So cultural displays, that's the adjective, noun, combination. Maintaining the culture. So definitely good use of grammar, but you might have a synonym for cultural. I can't think of one off the top of my head. And that's another point. You have that time limit. It's only 40 minutes. So if you can't think of a synonym, just like I can't think of one in front of the camera right now, it's a good idea. Maybe your second choice, go for a different part of speech. Now, I'll give you a chance to just look over this again. Are there any other words that you think are being overused? Right, so we're still on lexical resources. So basically the rule of thumb, don't overuse the same word. Can you see any other words here, apart from structure words such as the, that have been overused? Now, I actually did this before, so I can refer to my notes. The other one which I thought could be improved upon is people. Now, again, throughout these webinars, I want to try point out words that you can use or that are going to be an issue in a range of different essays. So the government, definitely there's a chance you're going to be using the government in many different essays. I would suspect that in every essay, you're going to use the word people. So this is a good word to think about how we can express it in different ways. Now, people from every country can visit museums. What's another way of saying someone from another country who comes to visit a museum or who visits a museum? Now, just to try and keep you on your toes at home, I'm going to give you another hint. Starts with T. This is another way of talking about specific people who come from other countries to visit museums. Unfortunately, in this day and age, or right now with this coronavirus, we're not going to see any of these people, but hopefully soon. So if you guessed tourists, well done. So again, just a different way of expressing people. In fact, I would say that people is one word which many students overuse. So yeah, there might not be too many direct synonyms for the word people, but there's all different kinds of people. People that come to visit museums, they're tourists. So what about down here? Local people. So local people. Now I would say though that the fact that the student has used an adjective before people, that's not bad. At least they're taking the opportunity to use more vocabulary. I'll just use red to circle that, which in this case, the extra vocabulary is the adjective, but I think there's another way of saying local people, and it begins with C. So I'll give you a chance. What's the word which means local people begins with C? In fact, there's probably two. Didn't think of that one in my prep. But if you guessed citizens, well done. And local residents. So, lexical resources or vocabulary, your main aim is just try to use a wider range of vocabulary. So, here are some ways that you can do that. And again, it's focus on those keywords which are going to be used throughout the essay. Off the top of my head, those were government, the arts, and spending or money. And then some specific ones which relate to the main body paragraph, which in this case were people. And what was the other one we had? Culture. So I think in this case, definitely some ways that the vocabulary could be improved. Let's move on to grammatical accuracy, which is, grammatical range and accuracy, which is the far right column on the band descriptors. Now, again, I mentioned earlier, definitely complex sentences are one that I think most examiners are going to be looking for, because they're mentioned in the band descriptors. So complex sentence. Now I'll just say also, while you're watching, you might also have a specific grammar question which I don't cover in the webinar itself. Feel free to type a message there on the Facebook page, and I'm going to be taking some questions at the end of my little presentation. So if you have a specific grammar question or vocabulary question, just type it in there and I'll get back to you at the end, hopefully. So complex sentences, what are they? I'll give you a chance to recall what I said, or if you already know, just review that. So, in English, or in most languages, we have clauses. I'm going to give you an example of a complex sentence. I like many things. I like spicy food. Right, so this is one clause. A clause is always going to have a verb. What's happened here? Believe it or not, this is a new pen. Right, so, okay, we've got a verb and we've got a subject. Now, we also have an object. Not every clause has an object, but anyway. With a complex sentence, actually I won't use contractions as a rule for writing. So when you do your writing, avoid contractions. If you don't know what a contraction is, there's a contraction. It's is the contraction. So because it is more interesting. Right, I grew up on a diet of potatoes here in New Zealand, maybe some tomato sauce and cheese put on top of them. So I like spicy food because it is more interesting. So I gave that example at the start of the presentation. Imagine I walked up to you on the street and just randomly said, because it is more interesting. Grammatically correct sentence, right? We have the subject, we have the verb, because it is more interesting, but that's not going to make much sense to you because we have another clause. One of those clauses depends on the other to give it meaning. That gives us our complex sentence. So your task, while you're at home there, see if you can find any complex sentences in this main body paragraph. I'll give you a chance to do that. Now, I think it's highly likely that you missed one complex sentence. And it's actually right here. Now, this was something again which I mentioned at the start. Now, I'm just going to leave out first of all, I think Alright, so I'm just going to put part of the sentence there. What's missing to highlight to the examiner that this is indeed a complex sentence? So I'll give you a chance. What's the blank word which the student could have included just to highlight that he's using a complex sentence? So take 10 seconds. If your answer is that, well done. So again, just use it, right? These are called verbs of thinking and saying, right? So think, believe, hope, say, all of those different verbs of thinking and saying. Quite likely, well, you're going to use them in your IELTS exam, particularly I think, which can be paraphrased as I believe. Always include that after those verbs of thinking and saying, just to highlight to the examiner that you're making a complex sentence. Now, to be honest, one-way arts do this. Well, there's another one. So the second one here is one-way arts do this is, right? So see there's two parts to that sentence, which makes a complex sentence. Not as obvious as some of the other ones, but I look right at the end here and I see this sentence, or two sentences. In addition, this adds interest for local people. This is because of cultural displays. Now, this is something you should definitely avoid. This could have been a complex sentence, but actually by creating two sentences, you've missed, well, the students actually missed the opportunity to make a complex sentence. So, again, I'm just going to put up part of the sentence. Now, I just realized while I'm actually writing this up, perhaps you might hear some voices in the background. If any of you can speak Korean, that's my wife. Anyway, hopefully her voice isn't coming through. Anyway, what word is missing there? This is a conjunction which is used to form a complex sentence. So, this adds interest for local people, blank. There are, now I've put in a subject and a verb to create a complex sentence. If you can see that the missing word is because, well done. So I think that would be a better way of representing these ideas. Form complex sentences whenever you can. That's going to boost your score for grammar. Okay, what I want to do now is move on to the next main body paragraph. And what you'll see on this sheet are actually two paragraphs, main body paragraph, and then the conclusion underneath it. Okay, I'm just going to erase this so it's not a distraction for you. Okay, I'll give you a chance to read the second main body paragraph. Now, before I even do that, I should mention that some of you are probably also realizing that perhaps this essay is a bit short. I haven't actually done a word count for it, but you get very good at estimating these things. I would say that it is not even 200 words. Now, the band descriptors themselves don't actually give a word count, or they don't make a mention of the word count. But we are told on the exam paper that we need to write 250 words. So I think you need to get to the word count if you're asking that question at home. Even though it doesn't mention the 250 word count in the band descriptors, what that falls under is expanding your ideas, or as it says under task response, fully addresses the parts of the task, presents a fully developed position, which is well extended and well supported. So what the examiner could do, if you are too short on the word count, is they could turn around and they could say, well, you didn't fully extend your ideas. So yeah, this essay is a bit on the short side, so definitely could have done with some more ideas. which, looking back to the beginning or thinking about the beginning of this presentation, that's why I would actually agree. That's why I would agree with the statement. Now, I do remember I told you to go ahead and read this, but let's pause for a second and think about task response. I would agree with the statement. Now, I'm going to put this back up for you. Okay, some people believe that the government spends too much money on the arts and that it should spend more money on other things. So this is why I would recommend agreeing with this statement to give your position. So this is going to give you the ability to talk about a number of different topics. This brainstorms some things that the government could spend more money on. One which comes to mind is education. That's because I'm a teacher, so I like it when the government spends more money on me. What are some other ones that you can think of? I'll give you a few moments to think about some other things that the government could spend money on, over and above spending money on the arts. So if you came up with health, well done. I said earlier in the presentation or in the webinar, infrastructure. Now, if you're wondering what this is, this means roads, the power grid, bridges, things like that. Some of you in more populated countries than New Zealand might say subway. We don't have a subway here in New Zealand. What are some other things? Housing. Right? So you see immediately, well, some of you, and I want to talk about this at the end actually, some of you might even say sports, right? Maybe that should be prioritized over the arts. So many different things you could talk about. And when you introduce these various topics into your essay, it's going to give you, by nature, a wider range of vocabulary. So I just wanted to step back and say, that's why I think that in this case, the student's probably struggling a bit to get to 250 words. And it's because I think the student has taken the more difficult position of disagreeing with the statement, right? So remember, the student's actually disagreeing here, and they are saying, or he is saying, that the government should spend more money on the arts. So, now that I've just addressed that word count and how to get a better task response, take a chance here to read the second main body paragraph. Right, it goes from here to here. So take a minute to read that. I'm just going to erase the whiteboard while you do that. Now, I can only count 3 sentences. This is a good rule of thumb to think about how many sentences you should have in a main body paragraph. From the video, if you've seen it, topic sentence, supporting idea, evidence. Now, evidence could be an example or an explanation. Then you're going to have another supporting idea and evidence to support that. Now, I know in the IELTS band descriptors, it does talk about your writing style becoming robotic. But I think if you follow this structure, it won't be overly robotic. If you put in some nice cohesive devices, if you link these ideas together with a topic sentence, which encompasses the supporting ideas. So anyway, here the topic sentence is, next, arts provide further entertainment for many people. So I think the main point made here is that arts entertain the people. So definitely, in my opinion, a very valid supporting idea, or a very valid point to make to support the argument that the government should spend more money on the arts. This is what I'm not sure about. The student has gone directly into an example. So to me, that's always a bit of a no-no. And that probably means that the main body paragraph is going to be too short. For example, cinemas are a good way to see local art. Also, children love to do art. So very short main body paragraph, which I'm not actually going to talk about how to extend this main body paragraph because, as I said before, I wouldn't even take this position to begin with. I would agree with the statement, and then I personally would talk about education, probably health, just because the vocabulary is going to be quite broad. So, but what I will talk about further, I always want to give some balanced feedback, some cohesive devices, so next, that's fine. That's fine. That's a good way to start a main body paragraph. It's just saying, well, here's the next idea that I have. The next idea being, arts provide further entertainment for many people. For example, now, just going to look down here because I think from memory, yeah, so the students already used this cohesive device before. So just like vocabulary, you want to use a range of different cohesive devices. What is another way of saying for example? Right, so actually I'll see if you can think of a couple. Take some time to think of two different ways of saying for example. I'm just going to look down here. Okay, the reason I was looking down there is I just want to make sure the student hasn't used this one. So, for instance, is another way of saying for example. Now, even though you're going to use the word example, you could say an example of this is right? So I would say go for this one first, but if you just want to express this in a different way, you could say an example of this is, right? So, but anyway, it's really good to see that the student is incorporating or using cohesive devices in his writing. Let's move on to the vocabulary. Obviously, the key word here is arts. We've already talked about that earlier in the webinar. I do see the word local again. So I have very good memory for vocabulary. So just keep thinking. You just want to avoid using the same words. I would say a couple of times you might be okay. Is there another way of saying local? Right, so just challenge yourself. Right, so remember, like I said right at the beginning, with your vocabulary, with your grammar, you're showing off to the examiner, look, I know all these different words. I have all these different grammatical structures that I can use to express my ideas. Now, what I could say for local, if you can guess the rest of this word, I could say regional. Talking about regions, I could say national, right? So again, just challenge yourself. Try to avoid using words which you may have a synonym for, right? So you're showing off to the examiner. But one thing I would also say in terms of the vocabulary, and it does relate to lexical resource, spelling throughout this essay is very good. So a lot of students ask, how many bands or how many points do I lose for spelling? Well, it does address spelling in the band descriptors under lexical resource. You might have a couple of spelling mistakes in your essay and you still might get a 9 for lexical resource. Because it does say rare minor errors occur only as slips. Those slips could be a spelling mistake perhaps, but we can never really be sure what the examiner is going to think. But definitely a strength of this essay is the spelling throughout is excellent. So well done. You should be in a spelling bee, I think. Let's move on to grammar. Now today I'm really pressing the point, and you're going to hear me do this again in these webinars. Complex sentences. I think this is a huge one because it's mentioned directly, right? Explicitly mentioned in the band descriptors. Can you see any complex sentences in this main body paragraph? Now, if you said no, well done, because there are not any. So that's definitely something which would need to be improved upon. I think at least once, hopefully, many times in any main body paragraph, you want to see a complex sentence or more than one perhaps. So, but again, just to balance out that feedback, like with the spelling, I think the student here has a good command of grammar, grammatical accuracy. So I haven't come across too many grammar errors or grammar mistakes, right? So now, talking about mistakes versus errors, very subjective, but this is something the examiner might look at. A mistake means, like if I drop my pen, like in real life, if I drop my pen, I knew that I didn't want to drop my pen, but I just dropped it. It was a mistake. The same thing happens with grammar. It means we know how the grammar rule should work, but we've just made an error with it, or a mistake, sorry. So I'm just going to write on this one here. So imagine the student wrote, for example, synonyms is, right? The grammar mistake here is the subject-verb agreement, right? Synonyms are plural, countable plural, does not take is, it takes are. So that might be, well, I would assume that most examiners would see that that's a slip, right? So in the band descriptors, it talks about slips. Perhaps the examiner would view that as a slip or a mistake. Errors in grammar means that it's quite clear that the speaker or the writer just doesn't have an understanding of the grammatical structure, and that's when you start finding it really difficult to comprehend what the student is trying to express through poor grammar. So just again, another big up with this essay. The grammatical accuracy throughout this essay is very good. You may have noticed some grammatical errors or mistakes. If you want to write up any of those and ask about them, please do. I'm not going to mark and correct everything in these essays because we could be there forever. But yeah, if you do have a question about vocabulary, about grammar, about possible cohesive devices, or anything, just put a question in there on the grade Facebook page. I'm going to do a Q&A at the end. So let's move on to the conclusion. So just if you haven't seen the video, I want to give you a structure, a format for your essay. You're going to have your introduction with your 3 Ps. Can you remember them? Then you're going to have main body 1, right? So then you're going to have main body 2. In some cases, you might have a third main body paragraph. As I get more volunteers giving me their essays for me to go through, no doubt we'll come across essays where you will need a third main body paragraph. You could have had a third main body paragraph here if you had another main point to make to support the position. That would have helped with the 250 words, but you don't always have to with an agree-disagree. Sometimes 2 main body paragraphs are definitely fine, right? So then we have our conclusion. Okay, so I'm actually just looking over at the screen there and just seeing some of the questions coming through. Let me go through the conclusion first, and what I'll do is I'll take all of those questions at the end, right? So, but I know some of you are asking what's the best way to get feedback. Well, with this webinar, type your questions into the grade Facebook page, right? And I'm going to answer those questions after I finish this presentation. So this presentation I'm going to wrap up after we look at the conclusion. That's not going to take too long, but then I can see a couple of questions starting to pile up. I'm going to answer those questions that you have after I've talked about the conclusion. But thank you for having some questions ready. Just to wrap up with the format though, if you remember, it's going to be paraphrase, position, and then the preview. So that's our format. Okay, first thing I really like about this conclusion is the cohesive device. In conclusion. So now you're only going to have to write one essay in your IELTS test. So in my opinion, that means you only need to know one cohesive device, which you can use every time. I get some students say, oh, but what about to sum up? Now, I would not go with this because that would indicate that you have a summary following. You're not asked to give you're not asked to give a summary in the band descriptors under task response. And I think it also mentions it in coherence and cohesion. You're asked to give a conclusion, right? So just use this every time. This highlights with a cohesive device that your conclusion will follow. Only one sentence here, I would say sometimes that's fine. In conclusion, arts play an important role in society, so the government should fund them. Really, to me, this is just a repetition of the position. I think this conclusion needs to be expanded upon. Well-written sentence, a compound sentence with so. So the difference between compound and complex is that with a compound sentence, compound is just A plus B, right? So A and B could be separated and they would still make sense, right? Right. So for example, I teach English and I also study Māori, right? So Māori is one of the official languages here in New Zealand. I teach English by itself, you can understand that. If I came up to you and said B, I study Māori, both of those clauses make sense by themselves. Anyway, nice to see a compound sentence being used here. Complex are probably the ones which you want to use more of. But I want to show you a way of expanding your conclusion. with a complex sentence, which is what I was building towards. So, I would just use this as part of your recipe for answering the IELTS essay or for writing the IELTS essay. I would make this my last sentence in the conclusion. So this could easily just be tagged on. Now, in many cases, your essay is going to be about the government, right? So in this case, we are talking about the government. Now I'm going to avoid using the word government because we've used that before. If I was the Prime Minister, now I mentioned I'm from New Zealand. We have a Prime Minister. We're not a republic. We don't have a president. If you wanted to use if I was the president, that would be fine. Here is the first clause with my comma after it. Now this is what I would do. I would build more heritage. I would develop, I think is a better word. Now, what I'm doing is I'm just referencing a couple of the main things which the student has mentioned in the main body paragraph. So one of them was the different sites such as museums. We also have cinemas here, but perhaps cinemas could also relate to art. You know, students. We could even put that here. Drama, there we go, even a better way. So what I'm doing is I'm using a complex sentence. So if I was the Prime Minister, an if sentence is complex, this is what I would do. And it just gives a little bit more detail to the conclusion, and obviously it's going to increase the word count. So a nice way to finish off a conclusion. So your conclusion, I think, in most cases can have 2 sentences. Okay, so I want to give you a chance. You might have a question here as well. I do have a couple that I can see on screen. Remember, how can you ask a question? Just go onto the Grade Facebook page, write it there, and I will be able to see it. So I'm just going to call this the Q&A. Some of you may know what this means. If you don't, can you guess? If you guessed question and answer, well done. So I want to have a Q&A at the end of all of these webinars. So first question I can see here. Does the essay need to be factually correct? That is an excellent question. I think it's probably better to be factually correct. There isn't really anything in the band descriptors that talks about being factually correct, but I would say if it's factually incorrect, it's not really helping you to develop your answer. So I know a lot of students like to kind of pull out these magical statistics as evidence. It's not really something that I like to do in my own writing. I guess the big difference, some of you are probably taking the academic test. Obviously when we're at university or even at high school, in our academic writing, we have books and the internet that we can use to reference. In the IELTS test, you should not be taking in any books. So I actually like to draw upon my own personal experiences at times. Probably that's more appropriate for general training tests. But I mean, no one's going to expect you to know all of these facts and figures exactly, right? So you can make them more correct, maybe not factually correct, by saying, I believe that, or I understand that. So what you're doing is actually, you're saying to the examiner, look, obviously I can't recall these facts. I don't have my smartphone here to check them, but this is what I believe to be the fact. So, but yeah, I would definitely try and make your essays factually correct, because I think it's just going to make a better impression on the examiner. So, for example, I wouldn't purposefully provide incorrect information. So I hope that answers that question. Do the body paragraphs need to be the same length? And I can see another question there as well, but I'll take this one first. Do the body paragraphs need to be the same length? Well, this one here is much shorter than the first main body paragraph. You don't want to have a huge imbalance. So I would say in general, they should be of similar length. There will be exceptions to this. I'm sure I'm going to get a submission about a 2 views and give your own opinion. With the 2 views and give your own opinion essay, usually what you'll see is the first main body paragraph will be about the same size as the second main body paragraph. And then the third main body paragraph where you give your opinion might be a lot shorter. But I think when you have an agree-disagree essay, I would like to see both of the main body paragraphs of a similar length. And you may remember a nice little recipe will be topic, sentence, supporting idea, and then evidence. Now, this should be I'll put it over here in red for you. This should be 2 to 3 times, right? So what I mean here is you should have 2 supporting ideas, 2 pieces of evidence, 1 for each, right? So topic, sentence, supporting idea 1, evidence. Supporting idea 2, evidence. Now, in some cases, you might even have another idea which you could add. But yeah, I think in this essay, I would definitely like to see another supporting idea and another piece of evidence, which would give similar length main body paragraphs. So I hope that answers your question. And another question I have here, what do I do if I don't know about the topic? That is a very valid question, and I get asked that very often. I just want to start off by saying that this is the luck element of the test. You are going to come across topics that you're not familiar with. This is why preparation for the test is key. So you want to really avoid that situation. This is why I think when you're preparing for your IELTS test, you don't always have to write whole essays. What I encourage a lot of my students to do in their preparation for writing task 2 is have a balance of this. 3 times, for 3 different questions, just practice planning your answer, right? So don't write the whole 250 words because that's going to give you more familiarity with the different topics. And then maybe for the fourth question that you practice, then write a whole 250 word essay. Now, obviously we're in lockdown at the moment. Maybe you're not as time poor. That means maybe you have more time. Maybe you can practice writing whole essays, but to avoid that situation, you really want to just prepare more for the test. Look at as many different questions as possible to avoid that situation. If you don't know about the topic, unfortunately, you do have to answer it. You are not given a choice in the test. And you're just, what I would do is I would just take some more time in that planning stage just to think of anything that I know which relates to that topic that I could write about. But yeah, that's a tough one. And if that does happen in the test, just yeah, that's the luck element. You have bad luck in that case. Try not to panic and just get your thinking cap on. Come up with anything, any ideas that can relate to the topic or the question that you're given. So yeah, definitely not an ideal situation. So preparation is the key there. Okay, I think that's probably for this first webinar. As many questions as we have time for, but I'm going to be doing these webinars every second day. So same time, which here in New Zealand is 9 p.m. 1:30 if you're watching from India in lockdown. They're going to be on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sundays. Now, if there are any changes to that schedule, it'll be updated on the grade Facebook page. So just to repeat, same time, definitely same place in lockdown, at home here in New Zealand. So Tuesdays, Thursdays. Now you can see that I'm using plural because our lockdown is 4 weeks, so we're going to run these webinars for 4 weeks. And Sundays, 1:30, is it IST, Indian Standard Time? That's PM, which in New Zealand is 9 PM. So I'm a big cricket fan. That means when I watch IPL, when I watch Indian Test matches, it's very late. So that's New Zealand time. So next webinar will be on Sunday. I hope you're watching. Think about more questions. But I just want to finish off. Now, I really want to say thank you again to the student who volunteered their essay. You're definitely on the right track, and I really hope this webinar and the feedback that I've given is going to help you directly. And obviously, I think it's going to be a benefit to everybody that watched. And if you have watched my videos, hopefully you can see those same ideas in action with a whole essay. So if you want to volunteer your essay, you can email admin@grade.com.au. This is an expression I heard. You can slide into the DMs or send a direct message to the grade Facebook page. If you're really bold, if you're confident, why not just post the essay directly onto the grade Facebook page? That might even create some conversation from other students. And you might even, talk about it before I cover it in the webinar if I get a chance. So, other things that you can use the grade page for as well. Obviously, these are extraordinary times. I'm so glad if you are in India in particular that you are in lockdown like we are here in New Zealand. That means that hopefully you're safe. I'm sure you are. It also means that all of us have some more time on our hands. Well, I'm sure most of us do. Feel free also on the grade Facebook page, let's try and connect. I mentioned before I love cricket, so I'm actually going to post my all-time World 11. You can critique it, but I can tell you there will be a couple of Indian players in there. No New Zealanders. Some Australians, for sure. We're all probably short of different ingredients. I know that in India, you guys only got, 4 hours to prepare for lockdown? We were given a couple of days' notice. Had toilet paper. I don't know if you had that problem, but we might want to even exchange some recipes or just, some positive messages to get us through this lockdown period. But what I can do is just keep providing these webinars, and I really just want to reach out to all of you, help you, and just make this lockdown time beneficial for you. And yeah, I hope this was of benefit to you, and I really look forward to Sunday doing the next one. So stay safe, stay sane, study hard, and I'll see you on Sunday.